Good afternoon, Rotary guests. It's my pleasure to welcome back after 5 years and introduce our guest speaker today, Germano. Emma is the director of both the Melbourne Market Authority and the Queen Victoria Market, two institutions that sit right at the heart of how food moves through our city and more broadly our state. With a career deeply rooted in agriculture, food systems and market operations, Emma brings a unique end-to-end perspective from farm gate to dinner plate. She's been a strong advocate for strengthening supply chains and ensuring that our food systems remain resilient in the face of growing challenges. Today, she's going to share her insights on a topic that's becoming increasingly important for all of us: Australia at the crossroads, food supply chains and national resilience. Please join me in giving a warm Rotary Club of Melbourne welcome to Emma Germano.
Thank you very, very much. It's difficult coming back a second time. It was by popular demand, although I think popular demand might just be taken, but thank you very much for the free invitation. And thank you very much for serving me, obviously, two of my favourite products, lamb and potatoes, which is what we grow on our farm out in Gippsland. But you couldn't believe the journey that lamb and those potatoes take to get to your plate here at Sofitel in the city. So yes, I'm a farmer. I'm the former president of the Victorian Farmers Federation and was very, very passionate about talking about agriculture and farms and how perhaps as a country we don't maybe value our farming and our food production in the way that we should. I was really pleased to see the awards go out today, and it strikes me that these wonderful women migrants to this country. I'm the third generation now in this country, and I can tell you that it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing what migrants bring to us as a nation. Migration has been the strength of this country, and when given the right opportunities and the right amount of support, migrants help the country to flourish. So thank you very much for your contribution, your future contribution, and the future generations and the contribution that they'll make to this country. I really personally appreciate it. And as the person who's always 2 seconds away from crying, I'll keep myself together. But it is the story of my family. And we migrated, and I say we, even though it was a number of years ago. My great-grandfather was the first to arrive in Melbourne, and he came in 1929, which is a very early time to migrate from Italy. And then my grandfather followed him a bit later on and left my grandmother, who didn't realise she was going to be signing up for a life in Australia, in Italy for 10 years because the war broke out, Second World War, and then she joined him afterwards. And then my other grandparents came in the 1950s. But being a grandchild of migrants and then being on the farm has probably given me what I take for granted as a maybe slightly unique appreciation of food security, and what food actually means to us. It's not just about meeting our calorific needs. It's also deeply about identity and about culture. And these things we've taken for granted, I think, since the Second World War. We don't really remember times, like people my age don't remember times where there was food scarcity. And the closest that we've had the opportunity to think about food scarcity is when we saw what happened during COVID. I think we were kind of still in the throes of COVID and the disruption to supply chains when I last addressed the club here. And I think about it, and I think, if you're the person now who mentions COVID or something that happened during COVID or the extended lockdowns that happened when we were, for those particularly living in Victoria, it's almost like, over it, don't talk about it anymore, move on. But I think it perhaps started to place a small little seed of insecurity in people's minds about where does our food come from. So we largely think that it's going to be okay when we go to the supermarket. There's always going to be food there. But we have seen, and it's not just within our living memory, but in our, not so distant memory, that the shelves were bare and we wondered where the food was coming from. And my job at that time as the president of the Farmers Federation was to say to everybody, calm down, don't panic. We've got all the food on the farms. You've nothing to worry about. It's your consumer patterns that are actually creating the shortages right now. We've got plenty of food on our farm. So stop panicking and everything will be okay. And we got over that little bump. And then not so long ago, only 2 months ago, we were talking about where's the diesel coming from. And of course, it's very natural to say in his life, in the Farmers Federation, to come out and put pressure on the Premier of the state to assist people to have public transport available to them and to drive their vehicles less often so that we will save the fuel, particularly diesel, for our farmers and for our food supply chain and transport. Now, the amount of diesel that's actually used by people driving their cars around the city and indeed the country is a tiny proportion. Most people don't drive diesel vehicles. Most people drive petrol vehicles and increasingly moving to hybrids and electric vehicles. So I don't know that it was really going to help if all of the diesel driving people stop using their diesel in regards to shoring up the supply chains. In fact, farmers only use about 8% of all of the diesel that we use in the country directly on farm. So let's cut back to me saying, gee whiz, this US-Iran business is looking a bit precarious, and I dare say that the thing that's going to happen, and we've seen these in shops before, is that we're going to run out of diesel, and at the very least, even if we don't run out, it's going to become very, very expensive. When I purchase diesel on my farm, which is for irrigation for our potato crop, we purchase in 1,000 litres at a time. So it's quite a lot of people that have got to forego having fuel in their car to make sure that I've got fuel in my diesel tank on the farm. And of course, really great to have foresight into the future, but if you don't do anything about that foresight, it doesn't normally help you out too much. So I thought, geez, should I purchase some diesel? Surely it'll be okay. And I don't want to be one of those people that panic buy, because I know what happens when we panic buy. The actual constraint on diesel was diesel that was already in the country. So of course, diesel prices shot up right as that was happening. I thought, oh, gee, man, I should have gotten more. What's going to happen? The pressure was increasing, and I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll get out a second diesel tank, and I'll ask the guy who delivers our diesel, or the company that delivers our diesel, to fill up the second tank. And of course, the fuel company's been quite aware of what the farmers were going to do. Came out and he said, oh, I don't know if the stand that you've got your diesel tank on is really going to be okay from an OHS perspective. And I said, give me a break. It's exactly the same as the one sitting beside it. And he said, yes, but you don't normally purchase this much. And I thought, you know what, I'd love to argue the point, but his case is clear and I'm becoming part of the problem. But we've got a system in Australia that rewards those who help themselves first. So that's what happens exactly when people are doing panic buying. We've got a system that says if I don't look after myself, I might end up without food or I might end up without diesel. So, okay, I wait 2 weeks, and at no stage in the last few months have I had any problems getting diesel onto my farm, albeit I have paid a much higher rate. Of course, eventually that will flow on to coming crop or the coming set of lands that we've got to go off our farm. And then I thought, what do I have to secure for myself? I thought I just need enough diesel to make sure that the lands, when they're ready, which will be 1,500 of them, I've got to make sure that I've got enough fuel in my tank, so that if the transporter doesn't have enough fuel in their tanks, that I'll be able to get a truck and get my product to market. So even though the amount of fuel that I'm using as an individual farmer is a small amount, the amount of fuel that's required the whole way through its supply chain to get the lamb and potatoes to the soccer field for lunch is a lot more than what we realise. And the supply chain is largely silent. So after the Victorian Farmers Federation, I joined the board of the Melbourne Market Authority, which is the wholesale market in Epping. Put your hand up if you're even aware of the fact that there's a wholesale market in Epping. Oh, great. That's I do always take for granted, though, that the Rotarian group is largely more educated than the general Joe. That's right. Most people, though, are almost unaware of how our food system continues to move whilst we're asleep. And the job of the Melbourne Market Authority is to create an environment where the fair trade of fruit and vegetables can occur. Now, the supermarkets in this country account for about 70% of all the fresh fruit and vegetables that are purchased in this country. So that's a huge whack going to those supermarkets. There's about 10%, give or take, particularly vegetables, that might go to export. And then the rest of that is moved through the central market. So there's the Melbourne market, Sydney market, Brisbane market. So it's actually a very small amount as a percentage of the total food movement. But I know as a farmer that when I get a phone call on this particular little grown cauliflowers, I get a phone call from Woolworths to tell me, hey, we need you to go on special this week because we printed our brochure that said cauliflowers were going to be on special in 6 weeks' time, irrespective of whether or not they knew whether or not there was going to be a glut of cauliflowers or a constricted market on cauliflowers. And they say things like, if you don't take the order, you won't get next week's order. So as a farmer, you're put in a position that even though I know I can get better money for my cauliflowers elsewhere, will I supply the supermarket, sometimes at or below the cost of production, just to make sure that their brochures and their specials that they put on, 8 weeks in advance are going to be built. So the central market gives me the opportunity to say, no, I don't need to do that, because even though it's only a small volume, I can actually send my produce to the Sydney market or the Melbourne market and get twice the amount of price for that same amount of product. So even though it's only a relatively small amount, the central market plays a pivotal role in the supply chain. And the other thing that happened during COVID, when we started running out of food at supermarket shelves, there was no problem in independent supermarkets. And that's because the resilience of the supply chain through the central market enabled food to stay on the shelves. So that's the Melbourne Market Authority. I'm also a director of the Queen Victoria Market, which is a cultural icon and is said to be more about entertainment and tourism. But it's one of the rare places in the city where you can still see the food supply chain sitting here in front of you. You can see what is abundant. You can see what things the prices are low on and what things the prices are high on. You can speak to a vendor who knows a lot about that amount of food. And to overlay all of that, the City of Melbourne is the owner of the Queen Victoria Market, and the Victorian State Government is the owner of the Melbourne Market Authority. So we've got political forces combining with this food supply chain. It's not just about pure economics, because sometimes it actually costs the City of Melbourne, particularly at the moment when they're going through a precinct renewal, it costs the City of Melbourne to keep the Queen Victoria Market there. And it's not actually something that is unique to Melbourne. All around the world, markets are seeing that their fresh food vendors are increasingly struggling to make ends meet. And a lot of markets all the way around the world are actually having to prop up and support the people in the markets that are selling fresh fruit, vegetables, meat, all the things that you expect to buy a market, which seems a little odd. So I guess it's really important that we consider, how does public policy affect our food systems, our food supply chains, and are these two things working together? I was asked as well, we see that much. When I was the VFF president, I was always ramming up and down, jumping up and down and saying, we need to have a food security plan in this country. On and on it went. It went on through COVID. We were able to demonstrate all of the reasons why we need to be very mindful about the way that we go about creating public policy in regards to our food security. But throwing back to my earlier comment, there's not a lot of people that can remember a time where there wasn't enough food. Collectively, I say that, because actually we know that there's something like 2 million Australians who will go to bed not having had enough food for the day. So there are people who experience that food insecurity all the time, but largely speaking, we say, oh, we export 60% of what we grow, we're just fine. And then the Strait of Hormuz gets closed, and we focus on diesel, like I said. Something that we haven't been talking about in regards to the energy insecurity and the oil insecurity that's happened because of this geopolitical upheaval is a little byproduct called sulfur. Sulfur is used in the production of just about everything that you can imagine. Not even in the mines. Most people, if you walk down the street and you say, oh, there's a global shortage of sulfur, they'll say, well, what do we need sulfur for? So right now, the things that I've got to consider on my farm is, do I put in a potato crop next year? I'm still going to be a price taker. So if the local market ends up that I have a glutton supply or an oversupply of potatoes at any point in time, I can't say, hey, market, I have to pay twice the amount of money for fertiliser and twice the amount of money for the diesel that is required to produce these particular goods. And farmers and everybody along the supply chain have to be profitable for us to actually experience true resilience and true food security. But the thing is that we probably think of food security as something that's external to us. But the point is that it's actually something that's internal. We just don't maybe think about it because we go to the supermarket, we buy our food, we don't realise that as members of society, we're actually not observers to the food system, but actually part of that food system. The way that we purchase is so important. If we always take the easy road and say we're going to go to the supermarket, we strengthen supermarkets. It might mean that we're going to have a longer term, less security in the longer term, but most people are struggling to feed their families and to pay rentals because of the mortgage and the interest rates that have gone up and the taxes that are always going up. And we're in a precarious situation in Australia, one would say across Crossroads, where we have to start focusing on our long-term resilience. But we always seem to skim through or skirt on through by the skin of our teeth. So we had this moment where we've got Albanese on the TV telling everybody it's fine, but maybe you should think about, keep going, travel for Easter, but then maybe after that we should maybe not travel as much. And you don't have to work from home because we know that the city needs people here because otherwise we have an economic problem. Don't work from home, but maybe start considering working from home. And I have a sense that, just like COVID, we've got this kind of insecurity that's creeping up on us. And I think that impacts everything that we do and how happy or content we are as citizens of the country. Now, also over lunch, it was, hey, please be optimistic. And I thought, all I want to do is complain about how politicians don't do enough and the things are wrong and they're focusing on migration incorrectly, and we've got these, these pollings where it seems like it's the fringe and the other fringe yelling at each other all of the time. What are the positives? Well, where is the place to feel optimistic? And the place to feel optimistic is that despite these challenges, Australia is in a box seat to be of course, when you hear you say the best country in the world, but one of the best countries in the world. We understand security of all sorts of types of security, food security, general security and personal safety, our threat of foreign interests, invading us. That can be to some places in the world it's almost silly to talk about, right? If you go and visit another place in the world, you very quickly realise, oh, maybe we're just a bunch of ninjas. But the thing about the difference between being a bunch of ninjas and being people who are concerned is the ability to put policies in place, not take for granted this wonderful wealth that we have being either accepted into a country like Australia or winning the world lotto of being born in Australia. We want to be in a position where we don't just keep taking it for granted. So I'm not sure whether I was relieved or disappointed, and that might sound a bit odd, but I was relieved that we've kind of gotten by the diesel problem because globalisation means that other supply chains around the world have stepped in and different producers step in and fill the gaps of things that we don't have, and there's talks and negotiations and all things that happen, and we got away with it. But that's the thing that keeps happening. We keep getting away with it. So the way that we get away with it is because the citizens and the businesses and the supply chains in Australia are resilient. But you couldn't say that we got out of any problems because of great national security policy. And I don't just mean security from a kind of defence perspective, but supply chains, food, so on and so forth. And when these moments sneak up on us, although I mean, saying sneak up on us is, you know, being very kind to politicians, because it seems pretty obvious to me that there's some issues going on geopolitically that they should be aware of. When these issues are upon us, that we don't have leaders inspiring us to feel safe and secure, because they don't tell us how we are part of the plan. They don't tell us what happens if we do run out of diesel. They just hope that they replace that diesel before our amount of diesel that we've got in the country dips below 25 days. That's crazy. Like we just got away with it. We still only have 33 days left of diesel fuel in the country. And we know that compared to the other countries in the OECD, that we're not meeting our strategic fuel reserves, what we agree internationally that we'll have. But they got away with it. They made announcements of the budget, you know, both the state budget and the federal budget, about how we're going to bolster our supplies and make sure we've got more fuel in the country. But I want to know something. How many days of fuel does Australia actually need to keep us going? How much of our sovereign internal capacity should we use as a lever for security? And I'm interested enough in what's going on in the world around me. I reckon that if they were talking about it, I would know about it. But I constantly think, geez, what happens next? And why are we living in a country where we've got all of this abundance, all of this wealth, but we know that abundance doesn't necessarily mean resilience? Why are we living in a country where we don't all know what the national plan is? We all feel better if we knew what the national plan is. Wouldn't that help us make different decisions about how we choose to invest our time and our money and the things that we aspire to in our life? Wouldn't it be nice if when we're sitting on the tram and you see someone who's wearing a face mask, you don't go, oh, that's right, there was this time when we got away with it. It felt horrific. But now if I mention it, I'm the person who can't get over COVID. I want to get over COVID. But the things that happened, the lessons and the opportunities that we get to learn, we just never seem to consolidate it. So for me, that's about a lack of leadership. And I don't know, I hope I don't have to wait 5 years. I hope I'll come back sometime soon, because I would love to talk about leadership in public spaces. But conversations in rooms like this one are so important. And I guess my key point is we need to ask more of our leaders so that we can, instead of feeling slightly insecure about how great Australia is, we can have full security in knowing what our place is in this wonderful country. Thank you.
Fortunately for all of us, Emma has left a little bit of time for questions, and she said before that she loves getting the curly one. So, Carol's got a curly one.
Thanks very much for putting together a very holistic picture of how the benefits and food movement happens throughout this country and the different avenues and mechanisms that are in play. And I share your concern about the fuel security. I work in the energy sector from the university perspective, and I've known about this 33-day supply, I guess, barrier for at least 10 years, and it's still not being addressed. But one of the things I start thinking about is when you do have an overabundance of potatoes, or the leaves, when I read about now is red wine, and turning that into biofuel, how does the kind of alternative energy and biofuel, biodiesel kind of configure in your picture here?
I think that's a great question, because that speaks definitely, absolutely to public policy. So in Australia, it's difficult for any of us farmers, let's say, to make that viable, because the fortunate critical mass in that is become cheaper, right? But there isn't critical mass there yet. So we don't have biodigesters like what you see in the US and what you see across the European Union. It's easy to be cynical and say, well, if it's only government subsidies that prop something up, is it worth doing, and how much do you, should we just let markets be markets? But to say, let's leave markets to be markets is almost a bit naive, because there's always some level of intervening in markets, because we use policy to create incentives, or like a carrot and a stick. So we haven't seen the Australian government step in and say, yes, we're going to try and make this worthwhile, so people do invest in it. But it's interesting because eventually over time, things end up happening because of the market anyway. So in the beginning, 10 years ago, when I was contemplating putting renewable energy on my farm, it was expensive. It didn't really make sense. You know, I was going to be one of the first rather go to the environment people. That was the kind of vibe. But then now I'm doing that activity again because the energy prices have become so expensive and the reliability of energy has become so disrupted that it actually now makes sense for me to get off the grid and it'll work out financially too. So you do need carrots, but it's so nuanced and you've got to be so careful about not overdoing it because you create a perverse outcome, but also giving people the incentive to do something. Because if we think about the negative gearing, everybody lost their mind, negative gearing thing, in most cases, and I understand why it's a really great tax rate, right? And it does all of these extra things, but most of the time people think they're making money because something's making them positive from gearing. So it's about that nuance of how do you get public policy right. And I would say mostly, if you only create public policy for a short-term 3-year cycle because you want to get elected next time, you'll never do the things that are about resilience of the food system because there's just nothing sexy about it because most people can't relate to it.
Got another question?
No, wait, I've got one.
You've got one?
Virginia came home on a Saturday, March, I think it might have been, with a massive, huge box of tomatoes and a massive, huge box of eggplants. So where did you get these? You went out to the wholesale market in Epping. So it's now open to the public. Can you talk me through how that works?
It's going to sound like a bad news story. So there was a trial to open the wholesale market to the public and it went gangbusters. We had 6,000 people, 6,000 cars and all the people in them. We ran it for 3 months, but the resistance that we got from the other retailers around us meant, you know, there was a lot of debate. Do we keep opening this up to the public or are we actually competing with our own customer within the market? I think there's a real opportunity though, because if we think about, you know, normally if you go to Aldi, most people in their mind think if I go to Aldi, that's going to be the cheapest place I can get my products, followed by the major supermarkets. And if there are some discount retailers, but the majority of the profit-oriented retailers are usually more expensive to buy their stuff at. I think there is a real opportunity for those profiteers to start acknowledging that people are moving back towards doing things like preserving sauce and making, you know, things and putting them in the freezer. There is, for all of the complaint about cost of living being expensive, there is something related to a sense of entitlement and maybe a disconnection of how to do things and be thrifty about it. In my family, it's just how it happens. Like in my family, if we leave the loaf of bread upside down or a bread roll upside down, we would get into trouble by my grandmother because she would see having the bread roll turned upside down as just inherent disrespect to the food. So that's absolutely in my DNA, but a lot of Australians, until it becomes trendy, like make yourself sourdough or you know, go back to bottling, don't really understand, especially with my generation, don't really understand that way to appreciate food and that way to save money. So there's a piece in there about how can we all, as a community, understand that, you know, you don't necessarily need to pay $50 a kilo for lamb cutlets. Lamb neck, people go, what do you use lamb neck for? The Italians make the very best lamb silver because they put a neck in there and we use every single part. So I think that is not just a bit like the panels, the solar panels. It will become more and more necessary for people to make wiser food choices to get the cost of living down. But good on you, and I hope you boil the tomatoes well enough.
We've got 10 years worth of tomatoes.
Very good.
Well, thank you, Emma, for your presentation today, and you certainly engaged the crowd. We enjoyed it, and on behalf of the Rotary Club, I'm not sure whether these were a gift last time, but here's a gift from the club to you.
Thanks so much.
They
I
are.
was going to say cricket socks.
There you go.
That's
There you
socks last
go.
time, and they're my favourite socks. Excellent.
From Wilderness Wear in Preston. Thank you,
Perfect.
Phil, but thank you for
Thank you.
along again.
Thanks, everyone.
Very good.
Thank you, But thank you to our special visitors and guests today for attending. We've enjoyed a wonderful experience with these presentations of the awards, and it's delightful that you're all part of it. Thanks to Phil for being the MC. Thank you to Adrian for today's reflection. Thank you for our setup and reception teams. A reminder that next week we are on level 1 Fitzroy Ballroom for our annual Environment Award event. Our guest speaker will be the esteemed public policy leader, Professor Graham Samuel, who I'm told was tutored by Dagan at school. And he will be speaking on from policy to law. Please diarise and join us and invite a guest.